Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about this series premiere of Quantum Leap, which is weird to say series premiere because it's also kind of like a season premiere. I'll get into that in a second. A great series / season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, first and foremost, my experience with Quantum Leap. I have like the most next to nothing knowledge about Quantum Leap. I want to say like a couple weeks ago, it had to be like back in August. I want to say like I caught a small portion of one episode on like Sci-Fi because it's all under the same umbrella, Sci-Fi, NBC, so I guess it makes sense. But I guess maybe that was in prep for the new season of the series. The reason why I'm saying that, just an interesting little thing. If you look on Wikipedia, this isn't treated like, oh, it's a whole new thing. It's literally considered season 6 of the show. I mean, and it makes sense. It's not even like a full, it's not like remake reboot. It's just a reboot of like we're revitalizing life back into this particular series. It's like a Doctor Who thing. It's like it's been years. I mean, there's a lot of Doctor Who comparisons you can make, but it's like, yeah, it's just a continuation. So it's kind of like that, like, oh, because Doctor Who rebooted in 2005, so it's that type of reboot. So I'm like, that's so interesting that they took that approach. Because I at first was thinking like, because it wasn't until like I read the details about it, I'm like, because I knew Sam was the, I was like, because I looked at it, I was like, isn't Sam Scott Bakula's character? Turned out it was. I was like, oh, so it's a continuation. It's not even like a fresh start. I was like, that's interesting. So, breaking it down, we get introduced to Ben, who's played by Raymond Lee, who is, I bet, like, my first introduction to him was on, Kevin Could F Himself, which he's currently on right now, too. So that's just interesting. He plays Sam, which is interesting, too, because considered, like, the original character in his show, his name, once again, I'm thinking too much about it. But Ben is a part of a group. It's basically a military group, like funded group, is basically brought together for the purposes of rebooting. You know, it's like, it's kind of almost meta. It's like, oh, Quantum Leap got rebooted. The project itself has got rebooted. I don't know whether the original show just got straight up canceled because they say like, oh, Sam never found his way home. So like, I guess the show ended with Sam never getting back home. And I guess like this is the show's way of handling that by being like, yeah, because we never gave the original show a proper ending, which is actually sad because you're like, because the show ended it ran from 89 to 93, I think I was reading. So you're like, so that means in the past nearly 2 decades, he's been stuck in time, which is like, I mean, and that's relative. I mean, what is time when you're time traveling, right? But I was like, that's interesting, and it's actually really heartbreaking to know, like, oh, in those 20 years, he never made it back home, huh? Once again, never seen the original series, so, but I was assuming just based on that, there is no conclusive ending. Like, they probably didn't resolve everything because the show probably ended before they could have. Maybe it purposely ended on like he's stuck in time and hasn't found his way home, but maybe one day. Maybe that's the nature of it. I don't know if there was ever do correct me in the comments down below. It feels like this is having an overarching story, but I'm wondering because this is, I don't know how many shows of that nature would technically have an overarching story. It seems like it's just like an episode of the week type of show. Like it's very, I don't want to like just like pare it down to it, but I guess procedural would be that type of like, it's just like very Doctor Who in that, like, because Doctor Who has like overarching storylines, but it's just very like episodical, like adventures of the week type of thing. So I'm curious for one, is this show, it seems like this show is going to be kind of like a combination because like giving a show like a more so overarching, like, I mean, there's older shows that have done it too, but it is a very staple thing nowadays. You actually see very rarely will a show be like a very self-contained episode type of thing. It just depends on what show you're watching, but usually the entire show is blanketed by an overarching story is kind of the whole point I'm trying to make. But anyway, kind of getting introduced to Ben, and he's working with someone who's starting up the Quantum Leap project, and apparently he ended up activating it without letting anyone else on the team know, including Addison, his fiance, who we later on find out she was actually supposed to be the one. She was signed up to be the one to do the Quantum Leap. He was supposed to be her hologram. I guess you could almost be like Cortana to some extent. I'm saying that as someone who doesn't really know Halo, so it's kind of once again, it's always weird when I reference stuff that I'm not well versed in, just to reference another thing I'm not well versed in. Either way, Some surprises, I was like, oh, for one, Ernie Hudson being in this. I was like, hey! And also, is it Mason Alexander Park, I believe. I was like, oh, I was like, maybe I knew you were in this. Either way, it was a delight to see them. If you're unaware, they're the actor who plays Desire on in Sandman on Netflix. I was like, because I think that was the first thing I'd ever seen them in. So seeing them in this again, it's like, I was like, I love it, because it almost takes a while to adjust because I'm so used to you. It's like, because it like you're like. Because that's the role I've gotten. It's only like a month ago, so it's like, yeah, that's kind of stuck in my head. So it's like, hey, that's, I don't know, that just like, that made me giddy seeing them in this. So that was pretty cool. Either way, and also finding out once again, I do enjoy things. I had this conversation literally just today because I recorded something talking about it, but I do love time travel. I say it all the time, and I wonder how people feel about it, because people are probably tired with like the time travel sci-fi genre just because there's like so much time travel. I can never get enough of it, because my thing is I always like time travel shows because it's always like, you know, some stuff like has a very unique thing to it, and this series like unique approach to time travel is so fascinating. The whole like when you time travel for whatever reason you hijack people's bodies. It's like a less jacked up version of Travelers, if you've ever seen Travelers, which I wonder was Travelers kind of paying a little bit of an homage to Quantum Leap in that regard, because they had it's a different time travel thing, but it kind of worked on a somewhat similar level. It's just like the one in Travelers is a lot darker, more effed up than like Quantum Leap's time travel. Because once again, the one episode I saw was like, that's weird. Why is it? It's like, oh, okay, now with the context of how the time travel worked, there was this particular episode I saw that I was like, I didn't understand that. I was like, that seems weird. It was like I think it was like a civil rights episode, I think. Once again, do correct me if I'm wrong. I was like, that's a weird episode to kind of just jump into not knowing anything about Quantum Leap. I'm like, what? And I was like, okay, now it makes more sense with the context of like, oh yeah, you basically hijack people's bodies when you time travel. But I'm assuming, circling back a little bit about the Addison thing, the fact is that he didn't want her to do this must mean he later on explains like there's something much bigger going on here. So whatever it was, he would rather put himself in danger, I guess, because maybe because the problem is with this time travel, there's a chance that your memory is going to get wiped. So it's like, okay, so, but it's like it was still a necessary risk that needed to be taken, and he didn't want Addison to be the one to take it. Why? Who knows, maybe he felt like he was more equipped because he is working with someone, which, you know, jumping around a little bit, we find out that what's her name, Janice? She's the daughter to Al, who was one of the people that worked on the project. And the fact is, even in the story, they were like, oh yeah, he died last year. I was like, the actor who played him actually died last year. And they dedicated the episode to him at the end, because it's like, yeah, Dean Stockwell, I believe. He was one of the original cast members. He was like, I think one of probably other than him and Sam, I think they were the only like recurring characters. Little bit I know, and I could be completely wrong about that. So I wonder were they originally going to implement him in a show like that, or was that never part of the plan? But it just so happened, and maybe they had to readjust things because he did pass away. You know, they probably didn't want to bring him back for it. Just sadly, just timing and just everything, just sadly. Well, no, because to be fair, he had actually quit acting, like I'd read, like back in like 2015, because he was, you know, health issues. So he probably, maybe this could have been the project to bring him back, or maybe he was just like, no, maybe it's just a thing of like, I give my blessings to it type of thing. I don't know. I didn't read too much into it. I am all over the place, but it is this interesting thing, too, because I referenced Doctor Who, and I also referenced Doctor Who a lot when I was watching The Time Traveler's Wife, both time travel things. But I love that this almost has that thing, too, because I'm giddy about love stories like that, where it's like, oh, yeah, time travel kind of, like, causes problems with our, like, yeah, we kind of meet each other and fall in love out of time and sequence. Like, obviously, that happens with the Doctor and River Song. It happens with, Claire and Henry from the Time Traveler's Wife. So it's a little bit of that going on because Ben doesn't remember Addison. It's like, which is kind of tough. It's like, right, you have to work with someone. It's like, this is someone you know, you're actually engaged, and he doesn't remember a single thing about you. And she doesn't want to tell him because it's like, I'm trying not to dump everything on you all at once because you're literally in the middle of, cool, you were robbing a place because you're the getaway driver, and then you find out you're a part of something even bigger because it turns out you're planning on robbing and stealing the Hope Diamond and replacing it with a fake, and it's just like, man, it's just one thing after another. It's a roller coaster, and Ben's just stressing out. They never really fully defined how much he remembers because, like, well, there's some stuff that's so ingrained in it. Like, he doesn't probably remember anything about his life. He's just, again, just kind of thrown in the deep end here. And I think, once again, it's almost befitting to some extent because, once again, it's not like a full-blown, like, they kind of catch you up if you've never seen the original series. And I don't think you need to have seen the original series. I'm sure it probably would help in certain regards, having a better understanding of how everything works. I mean, even they're, like, figuring things out because they're like, right, Sam would help people, and that's how he would leap from one time period and from one person's body to the next into another different time period. But it's like, we don't know why that happens, which is a very, like, Kingdom Hearts like approach to things. Like, the more you help people out, the further you can progress in the world. It's like, it's especially like they make a whole plot point of that in Kingdom Hearts 2. It's like, the more Sora and the gang go help out people, the clearer this signal opens up, that signal leading to the final area in the video game. Either way, tangents and all that aside, it's just, I'm sure, a very similar principle in that regard. But they're like, why does that work? I don't know. The fact is, they don't even know. Must mean like the original show might have never explained it, because it's like, no, who cares? Science. Well, science fiction. Don't get too caught up in it. It's like, we're having a fun time travel shenanigans here. Like, leave it at that. Or maybe, like I said, maybe there was a legitimate explanation for, like, why it works out, and maybe this new group just doesn't have the explanation of why it works like that. So, but what I was talking about before is, like, it does seem like stuff that Ben knows and is somewhere in his mind. He can't access it. He just doesn't know it's there to be accessed, because it turns out, like, he can speak, Romanian, but he also, like, can speak a whole bunch of other languages. He was almost like, wait, did I just? And it's like, yeah, you can speak a whole bunch of languages. So probably a lot of that muscle memory, both, just brain wise and just body wise, is probably there to some extent, but he just doesn't know to access it yet. So that was kind of interesting. And it's like, right, he has the whole, because she's a hologram, we haven't really, I mean, maybe that's just an original show thing of, like, the hologram, like, didn't really bother explaining, like, yeah, you could project to the person. And it's like, I mean, maybe that's just something they've come up with. Maybe that's from the original show, maybe it's not. But the whole making it so that only the person that's time traveling can see you. So that's interesting. I mean, less explanations and stuff like that. Granted, it makes Ben seem super nuts, the fact that he's just talking to himself a lot of times. And also the time travel rules in regards of, well, they had the future events. They were like, all right, a bomb went off and no one was hurt. But now you're like, is that like not a paradox, but like a kind of a catch-22, not catch-22, what is it? A loop? That it's like, because a moment they're like, oh yeah, there was like the people who stole the Hope Diamond got away, but then like the bomb went off and no problems. It's like, no, well, the fact is, the way things change, it does seem like things did change, but I don't know, like, I don't know whether it's a situation because because the timeline does get affected. So at first I was like, could it be a thing of, the bomb went off just like it does later on in the episode and no one got hurt, just like no one in the episode got hurt? But so I was like, wasn't it because of Ben's interference to change the time? But it seems like everything's set in stone to some extent. Like, maybe it's kind of like a Legends of Tomorrow thing where, like, you can have access to the technology that lets you know that time hasn't been affected, but then it lets you know what has been changed. Because they do, like, even though he's in the middle of everything, they still have records to be like, okay, you got found out, Nick got found out as a cop, which I thought that was kind of an interesting twist. It would kind of make sense why, like, all of a sudden last minute you want to be a part of a job. It's like, he's an undercover cop trying to expose this whole thing. But it's like, yeah, in the original timeline, he never got caught. So even though he's up here mucking things up, it still takes a while for time to fully solidify. Like, I wonder if we're going to get an explanation for that. Once again, some of this is probably already answered in the original show, that maybe they will. I'm assuming they'd retread just for people who are like me, who might not have ever seen the original series. But, like, I'm curious. I'm assuming it's just kind of like, yeah, time takes a little while for it to solidify. So it'd be like, until like things have completely solidified, time kind of stays as it is. So they go like, okay, because later on, Addison's able to be like, yeah, this is what happens later on, even though like it, so it's unclear. Like maybe because it does seem like they are basing this on projections by like this supercomputer called Ziggy, which when I hear Ziggy, I immediately think of Ziggurat 8. Because wasn't the character's name Momo? I could be misremembering from Xenosaga. She called Ziggurat 8 Ziggy, because there's multiple Ziggy. Whole thing, right? So that's what immediately crossed my mind the moment I heard Ziggy, which I'm like, man, it's been a couple years I've not thought about, I've thought about Xenosaga, but it's like, I hadn't like just thought, like Ziggurat hadn't popped in my head in God knows how many years. Either way. I'm getting too caught up in like the technical details of it, not the nitpick or anything, but I'm just like legitimately curious. Like I said, I'm always fascinated with understanding like how this whole thing works. So maybe it's just because of Ziggy, they saw the projections of like, okay, because this is what happened time frame wise, this is like maybe Ziggy does the calculations or something like that, or maybe Ziggy's the one that is able to keep track. And it's like, no, because if time changes, you'd forget. So how do you prevent yourselves from dealing with like the paradox effects of that? Like, I'm curious, like, how do you block that off? I'm once again, I'm getting too like into nitty gritties about it, but like, it has to be Ziggy. Like, Ziggy must like keep a lot of stuff like solidified, and maybe that projection room that Addison goes into to talk this. I was about to call him Sam. Ben. That maybe that ends up kind of protecting her, so she keeps the knowledge, but she goes in and out of the room. So I'm like, I don't know. It all has to be Ziggy related. It has to be like that supercomputer keeps all that stuff solidified, and maybe it has like some like anti time changing stuff to it that it doesn't get affected. I don't know. I'm curious about the whole thing of like, obviously this applies to not only Ben but also to Sam. Is it you jumping in a person's body, throwing the timeline off center? Is that the thing that has to be corrected, or is it just a thing of even in the original timeline it was kind of wrong, it shouldn't have gone that way, so let's try to make a better thing, which is like changing the timeline. That's always the big time, that's the number one time travel rule. Like, you don't change the timeline, Ben does, and everyone else kind of supports him doing that. Because the whole thing is you find out, what Ryan's doing all this for. Like, it's like, oh, his restaurant. It's like, oh, you're trying to get money for your restaurant. It's like, no, his wife is sick and they need the money to get her treatment. So he probably like ran out, like probably fell behind on payments for the restaurant just for the purposes of taking care of his wife. He's making her think they're getting loans and stuff. So that's why he's a part of all of this, just for the sake of trying to help his wife, which is like, you kind of feel bad for him, especially knowing he ends up getting killed at the end of all of this. It makes you wonder, why did he die in the original timeline? Because Nick, which his real name's Matt, was never found out to be a cop in the original timeline. So why did Ryan die? I guess like what's the guy's name? Kane, which just saw him in Westworld. So I was like, oh, the interesting timing on that as well. But I guess him and his partner, I guess they ended up killing Ryan because they would rather split it 2 ways than 3, I guess. Because the whole point was like they left Matt behind, like they got separated. They ended up stealing the jewel and bounced. But then Ryan ended up getting shot. But the security guards were locked in a room, so it's like, how did that... Well, no, because it's actually a 5-way, because there's 4 people, because I forgot about the dude who actually who made the guards kind of get stuck in that room. So I guess they were like, right, we'd rather split it 3 ways than with you. But like this timeline, it makes sense why they'd have motivation to kill him, because they found out about Matt being an undercover cop, but they never found out in the original timeline. So it makes you wonder, why did they kill Ryan in their OG timeline? Maybe just, once again, greed. That amount of money, ain't it like 200 million? It's like, that splits a lot more nicely 3 ways than 4 ways. I did love that this episode definitely gave me kind of almost like, it's immediately where my mind goes, and I guess like I immediately think like, oh, Uncharted, which are like, oh, does that mean Indiana Jones? I have not watched enough Indiana Jones and movies to know, but it like definitely gave me like Uncharted 4 vibes, him in the tuxedo and everything, and I love the whole, oh, can I dance? And Addison's like, you think you can? So... him also like running up and like knocking the guy out, and it's like, yeah, when you don't throw punches off, then you're not used to it. And she's like, who are you? He's like, oh, I'm not the guy who punches people, bad guys in a tuxedo. And it's like, no, you're the guy who like punches numbers into calculations and stuff. It's like, maybe there's been, once again, there's that muscle memory thing of who he, maybe all the stuff with Janice is like, she's kind of been training him and pushing him towards, being more equipped to take on this journey, because maybe Addison was a lot more prepared than Ben was, and he became that person to fill that void or role to some extent. I don't know. All the while Ben's doing all this, everyone back present day is trying to get Ziggy back online so they could fully track down where Ben is and then yank him home. Because originally he could have just called the cops to resolve the whole situation. Ryan would have gone to jail, but he would still been alive. But for Ben, it's like, no, like the fact is, Ryan dying, like eventually like his wife would die without like that support either, so it's like their daughter would be left alone without both of their parents, like losing her parents like back to back like that. It's like, no, like Ben wanted to try and help, he wanted to try and do the right thing, so he didn't take the easy solution. But like I said, present day, the head of security, she was kind of being like, yeah, you should fire me. And like Ernie Hudson's character is like, what are you talking about? It's like, she's like, yeah, this kind of fell on my shoulders because I'm the one that came up with the security system and stuff, and the one that been disabled, and we don't really have any answers to all of that. And it's like, he's like, so you want to take the easy way out, leave while we have to be the ones that juggle all this. Your quitting is denied, like get back to work type of situation. So it's like, right, we're kind of all in this together. The fact is she's the one that found out about the Janice clue. She's the one that kind of opened the doorway with that whole situation. And even Ian's kind of stressing out because it's like, yo, one of my best friends is out there, and just everything him and Addison are going through right now. It's like, they were all in the dark about some of the moves he was making. And now it is a situation of, well, it's like, he's like, yeah, it's almost like coming off the trip of like mushrooms or something. And then Ernie Hudson's character looked, and I love Ian be like, not like I would know anything about that because I work with the government's military and I would never be on mushrooms or anything. I love that. Ian seems like the quirky scientist character. Of just being like, yeah, I'm like the smart person who is a little bit awkward. I think Ben's kind of the thing. He seems like socially awkward. But circling back, the whole him dancing with the lady that's a part of the crew. The fact is that like the whole dance sequence, it was like, and once again, him in the suit and tie just made me think of Uncharted 4 to some extent. Also showing like nothing's ever 100% set in stone, because it's like, cool, no one gets hurt because everyone's inside. And she's like, oh, that's going to be the case. Grabs the gun, pops off some shells, people leave. Luckily, they were able to, well, not enough time to fully disarm the bomb, so let's throw it down in the sewer. So that all worked out. And then it's nice to know, like, Ryan was able to turn on his fellow cohorts and kind of come out of this okay. I forgot, like, how he ended up making money in the back end of all of it. I think he ended up I think the thing was his story got out there, people supported him, and he was able to, the hospital, like, waive the fees for his wife's treatment. So everything kind of worked out in the end. Apparently, will eventually even get his restaurant back. So it's kind of nice that everything worked out in the end. But I also do love that, like, almost, it's just star-crossed lovers, but in a more space-time continuum type of way of, that line from Addison that she's basically making Ben, like the thing Ben said to her at the party about how, like, basically no amount of distance will ever separate them from like a scientific perspective. She kind of throws it back on and is like, oh, and I said that at a party. It's like, I must be a really, really fun guy. You ultimately have to ask the question too, what happens to like Nick/Matt when eventually Ben leaves his body? Does the timeline like naturally fix itself and automatically Matt has all the memories, or he's just gonna be like, oh, it's a blank spot to me, I don't remember, oh, I guess I did all this stuff, I guess I'll take credit for it, move on, no big issue. Like, maybe that's kind of what that'll get allocated to. Ultimately have to wait and see, but that might be something they just never answered before and probably won't bother answering now. Sadly, their attempts to bring Ben back home don't work, and they in fact actually kind of lose where he is, because the whole point of restarting this project was picking up where Sam left off and making it so that the project makes it so that the person can time travel to a specific point in time and not be bounced from random points in time. But it's like in this case, it might not be as random because Ben did upload a whole bunch of code, and now knowing Ben saying like, right, what I'm doing is I can't tell you everything, but you're gonna learn some stuff coming up soon. But everything I've done is for a greater thing. So it's like maybe this is about a thing of like maybe the space time continuum is collapsing or something, and it's about saving the day. I didn't even think about it too because I was like NBC too, and like right, there's also NBC also had Timeless too, another time travel show. But it's like I mean I doubt it's a timeless thing of like some bad guys are time traveling, or there's a Rittenhouse situation of some bad guys using time for their own benefit. I don't know whether it's like about Sam. Maybe it has something to do with the government. The fact is the military is like opening up this project now. Maybe there's something that Ben and Janice ended up finding out about that it's like, we need to step in and do something now, because if we don't, this could all end badly, because we can't let any of this fall into anyone else's hands. I mean, maybe the long run is also getting Sam back. Like maybe you get like a guest appearance from like Scott Bakula, like depending on like how everything ultimately ends up playing out. I think would be kind of interesting. Because the original show, like I said, I'm assuming because it started in '89 that it is from a situation of like, it was 89 going back. So I would assume that was what time frame the show was set place in, and this is set in 2022. So you probably have even more room of time travel, because I doubt there was any future time travel in Quantum Leap. Like, how would you be necessarily prepared for that? But you never know. There's, a Doctor Who does a lot of time traveling, but at least the Doctor has like a lot of knowledge of the future, and so it's like, that's a little easier to deal with. Like the past is a lot easier to deal with, so I can only assume it's all been about the past. So you have probably even more range of like what time frames you could go to. Probably going to avoid too many time periods that the original, or at least points in history that the original series covered for storytelling purposes and stuff like that. Especially once again when this is treated as more of a continuation rather than a complete fresh start. So. What we see at the end is him inside of a rocket getting shot off to, I don't know if that's like the, whether that's him in, what was that, 69, or was that early? I don't know the date of like the moon landing and stuff. I don't know. I would assume that has some correlation to where Ben, I'm literally about to say Sam every time just because of, not just Sam because of Scott Bakula's character, but Sam because of Raymond's character on Kevin Kneff and stuff, because once again, new episode literally just aired. And also, I didn't even think about it because I'm recording this on Tuesday. It's like Tuesday afternoon when I'm recording this. This should still come up today. But, they both air on the same night too. So that kind of, I think, also throwing me for a little bit of a loop. So, either way, I'm here for it. Once again, I'm not trying to poke and prod and stuff like that. I'm so interested because I'm going into this knowing nothing, and maybe that's why I have the thousands of millions upon questions like that. This review was nothing but a whole bunch of questions that probably, once again, would have answered if I watched the original series. Maybe in between now and then I'll watch, at least try and track down the first couple of episodes of the original series just to get a feel and vibe, and then maybe jump to the end of the series just to see how it ended. I don't know. Probably not, but at least the first few episodes to kind of get a better vibe and see, like, compare and contrast this start to that start. And, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what kind of wild journey this is going to be, how things are going to play out, what time period they go to, what shenanigans ensue, understanding why Ben did all that he did. Was it Janice that came up with the code, or are they working with someone else that came up with the code? To be fair, like, Al was a part of all this, and Janice wanted to be a part of it, but the military was like, yeah, you have too much of a close attachment to, like, Al, your dad, and Zam, so it's like, no, we're not going to put you in this. So that was why they kind of kept her out of the loop in all of this. So it'll be interesting to see where all this ends up taking us. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.